So, ladies and gentlemen, it is exactly 7:30 in the evening in the Central Time Zone in Dallas, Texas, and that can mean only one thing for the enlightened who come here every week. And tonight, I assume all of you have done your homework and had the just onerous, hard task of watching this wonderful movie in Amarcord, which is just a just a sheer delight. There are some movies that are like, make you think a lot. There's a lot to think about and are depressing. But in this time of being in lockdown at home and in depressed world, to have such a joyous cinematic experience is just a really great thing. And to join me in tonight's discussion, we have my friend Scott Churchill. And I've known you for what, 30 years maybe?
Over 30 years, yeah, amazing.
I think
back to the beginning.
We probably both had black hair back in those
Oh,
days.
we did, yeah. No, it goes back to the beginning. You were founding the Dallas Video Festival.
Yeah, God, what was I thinking? Uh,
Well, you've done a very amazing job of it, that's for sure.
Well, thanks. And in case anybody don't know, the DocuFest will be October 1st through 4th. And boy, do we have some great films, some really, really wonderful films. And one really interesting film about film history, it's about the first film, and it's not by the people you think made the first film. A little bit
Not by the Lumiere brothers, not.
No, there's all this controversy of what really happened first, and there's a really nice film about that. So, Scott, before we get into talking about the film, since I've known you for a long time, but many people don't. How did you first get interested in film? Because you are, aside from writing about film and talking about film, you have a regular day job at a university where film is not what you mostly talk about.
Yeah. Well, the interest in film goes back to college and graduate school, particularly in Pittsburgh when I was a grad student in the 70s. We had the Pittsburgh Playhouse that was like the Granada. It had a couple movies a night. They were all classics, and that's where I basically saw Easy Rider when it first came out, but also saw Bergman films, which I could hardly comprehend. My first Werner Herzog, The Mystery of Kaspar Hauser, which totally blew me away.
Oh yeah.
For the phenomenology of the experience of that character, and others. So we were all avid film goers as grad students. But it's actually I think a short but funny story is that in 1985. In 1984, I started doing movie reviews for Irving Community Television Network, and then decided, hey, why don't I do an undergrad class? I'll call it Psychology of Film. One of my art professor colleagues rolled on the floor laughing, and while he was rolling around, kicking his feet, saying, why don't you just teach the psychology of art? It's like, I guess if you're a psychologist, you could pick anything as the subject matter and get away with it. So I started teaching this course on the psychology of film, and people would ask me, how did you get started doing that? And I said, well, you see, I'm a film critic for Irving Community Television Network. And so that gave me some background on film. And then said, well, how'd you get started doing film reviews for TV? Well, see, I've got this film course I teach. So I kind of log rolled. I had no credential. I was just a film lover, a cinephile, and I decided to do free movie reviews for cable and teach a course at the university, and they just kind of fed each other over the years.
So, Scott, I have to tell you a story that's really great. When I was an undergraduate at Temple University in the 70s, early 70s, and I knew that I wanted to study film and learn about film, every class I had the word film in it. U.S. history through film.
Wow.
Film as a novel. It's like I scoured the catalog at Temple University so that I didn't have to take like English 101. So I just was able to just and as a result, it was great because I learned all this stuff, and but I didn't get the broader knowledge of things that you get when you just study things for what they are. Psychology just for psychology, as opposed to just how it relates to film.
Yeah.
And I really do feel like I've missed something in my life. So can you tell me if you remember the first time you saw Amarcord?
Yeah, it was 1973, I want to say. I was a first year doctoral student in Pittsburgh at Duquesne, and I saw it in Squirrel Hill at the Forum Theater, which was the art theater in town. And I remember my two buddies and I, we got stoned before going into the theater, and we sat down to see this. And at the last moment, practically, three people who were really tall came in and sat right in front of us. And we looked at each other, and one of my buddies was a big guy who was an Armenian, and he stood up, and we all stood up with him, and we walked around and sat right in front of them, because there was like 2 rows they could have picked, 3 rows, and they picked the one that was right in front of us. So we watched this, and I was just spellbound, mesmerized from start to finish. It was not like the Bergman intellectual films that you had to cryptically decipher and get into the morose. You know, I had seen 8½, and I didn't understand anything about it when I'd seen that. I had seen La Strada and like that, but Amarcord, this beautiful color, you know, the textures and the episodic, you know, the lack of a narrative arc at the time, just the fact that it was vignettes over a 1-year period of this little town by the sea. It was just pure magic, and we were spellbound by it. And it became very quickly one of my favorite films. And then when someone asked me to make a list of my favorite 10 films years ago, I put that as number 1. And I still say, for all of it, as much as I love 2001: A Space Odyssey and Citizen Kane and Ikiru and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, if I had one film that I could bring on a desert island to watch whenever I wanted it, I think it would be Amarcord, because I never cease loving every scene. And I don't know the whole film, even though I've seen it 30, 40 times. I don't know it so well that I already know what the next scene is going to be, except I know when he leaves the tobacconist shop, he's going to be home waking up in a fever with his mother tending to him. I remember that connection. But
Absolutely.
usually, you know, the vignettes are so well done, and he's got that wind blowing as a connective device, and it usually fades out and fades in. It's almost a surprise every time what that next scene is going to be. So, yeah.
And it has a kind of, you know, the attitude of it. It's just the whole sort of, and it's not just the mise en scène. There is a tonality that's both sweet, nostalgic, deep. It has a lot of the expressive imagery, all of that kind of sense of performative craziness, and so many things that we think of. But there's an underlying sweetness that you don't see in some of the other Fellini films, that I think just makes this, you know, completely different.
Yeah, and the sweetness is so much a part of his style of direction.
Yeah.
I was, instead of rewatching the film, I was watching the Criterion Collection interviews with Noel, what's her last name? She's the French actress who played Gradiska.
Oh,
And she, huh?
oh,
Yeah,
I don't remember, but man, she's great.
fantastic. Well, she got called in to do the screen test for the film. She was in bed at 2 in the morning in Geneva, Switzerland, and she gets a phone call from Federico, and he wants her there at 10 in the morning in Rome at Cinecittà Studio number 5. And she says, how the hell am I going to get there at 10 in the morning? I don't mind you waking me up at 2. And he says, I don't know, but I know you'll find a way. And when she got there for the costume fitting, they hadn't made anything yet. So they made her take all of her clothes off, and they wrapped her in this big rug-like blanket that was red. And all Fellini, like you dressed in red, all Fellini wanted to see was how she looked in red.
Red.
Because that was going to be important. And she was mad when she stepped out wearing this blanket, and everyone was laughing at her, but she got the part.
And yeah, and the red is, I mean, the color of the film is really kind of important. And she's not the central character, but she's certainly the main hue.
Yeah. Yes. Well, she said that in filming Amarcord, there was such a close intimacy. I learned that he worked for over 20, 25 years with the same crew. And
Yeah.
when the Cinecittà studio crews were all on strike, the only crew that would not join them on strike was Fellini's, because they loved him so much, because he treated actors so well. And then they shut down the power, so that's what happened there. But in any case, it's a very sweet film. I've looked in some notes I had put together some years ago, and I found there is a book that he published called Amarcord, Portrait of a Town, that accompanied the release of the film. And he begins it with just a 7-line poem entitled Amarcord. I don't know if everyone knows that Amarcord, originally spelled with an A apostrophe, is a local dialect in Rimini, and it means I remember. So it's just short. He says, I know that when a man is 50, his hands are very clean. I wash mine several times a day. But when I see my hands are dirty, it's then that I remember my carefree boyhood days. Very simple, but that's what he chose to open his book with, that accompanied the release of the film, as a film that was the desire for memory and the memory of desire. There was that kind of mixture of a nostalgic trip back into his adolescence.
Well, great that you found that note. That really does add to the discussion. As I was, watching the film, I watched it last night and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I had so much going on to take that time out and just to really enjoy it, changed my mood tremendously. But I kept thinking about like how this film is similar but yet so different from Roma, but both Fellini's Roma, and then if you think about Roma that came out a few years ago, about another director sort of thinking back on his youth and the kind of stories that they had. And there are some kind of similarities. And in Fellini's Roma, it's about the big city as opposed to the small country, and it has again that tone which Roma doesn't have. There's that warmth that you totally love. I called it, and I just was trying to figure out what it really meant, snarky nostalgic comedy.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that just because there is a kind of snark value in there somewhere about how he just approaches anything that's any kind of sense of authority at all.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
There, that he just kind of rubs his nose in it in a kind of beautiful way.
Well, yeah, I mean, the film certainly pokes fun at these institutions of education, the church, and the state,
Right.
government, church, and schooling. He's poking fun and kind of deconstructing them and at the same time.
And the scenes that I totally forgot about. There are many things, something you watched in 1973. There are many things you forget, and I completely forgot the whole sequence about the fascists coming, about and showing up, and how that fits in. All of his films have that anti-authoritative, kind of feel to it, but sort of taking a very specific, look at the fascists. And I just love that scene when they're coming in from the airport and you just got all this dust around and you can't even sort of see them, the big Hadou, and it just like turns into dust, literally. And then he's running through the streets and running up the stairs, and then you got the kids in the hula hoops doing their thing. I mean, I thought that was really good. And the sequence with the class, with the student making fun of that. And again, just sort of thinking to that era, right? Relatively, not the same time, but thinking about how Truffaut shows his class stuff in 400 Blows, say, and that has, it's not cut up. It's, you see scenes, but it sort of is the same feel about how education is useless, and for a young kid it's like the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
And it's very much geared to that, whereas in this film it's just this montage of craziness. And of course the one image that you just can't get out of your head is the one kid who's doing that.
I know.
And the teacher like doesn't get it until
Martin
the very
Plum.
end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Well, he did sketches for it. I was looking at those. He actually drew pictures, color pictures, for each of the teachers, and then they got people to look just like what he wanted in that. But the comment on fascism and Mussolini, that was the stuff that I was least drawn to when I first saw the film. But I realized later that the adolescent state of mind of the provincials in Rimini was the basis for their fascism. What I think for Fellini, this was a film of his reminiscence of his own adolescence, shown through the eyes of his best friend Tita. And so he it's kind of an alter ego, that figure. That's sort of like a Woody Allen film where Woody Allen is the character, even if it's somebody other than him. But Fellini wrote, and I wanted to bring this in, I consider fascism as a kind of degeneration to a historical level comparable to the stage of an individual, that of adolescence, which corrupts itself and can proliferate monstrously without succeeding to evolve and become adult. Also, fascism and adolescence are certainly representations of our most concealed and repressed psychic state, which is therefore stupidly aggressive. Sounds like some leaders in our country.
Yes, as you were reading that, I think that could easily be an analysis of our current situation.
Yeah, that's what I know.
I totally do. But the other thing that's, about those scenes with the fascism is, it's like most people don't really remember much about Mussolini. Anytime you hear things about World War II, it's always about the Nazis or the Japanese. It's like the Italians and the fascists sort of get left out. Mussolini, you might know a gesture or two and sort of what he looked like, but like very few people knew what it was like to live under fascist Italy. And I think that's one of the kind of interesting, sort of bits, when his father gets taken in and, he gets the castor oil.
Oh my gosh. Well, that scene, has anyone in the group who's here now, have you seen the film Fellini, I Am a Born Liar? It was a documentary that came out about 15 years ago. It's got Roberto Benigni in it and Donald Sutherland. I forget the name of the director. It's a phenomenal film. If you're film lovers, and especially if you like Fellini, it's easy to find. Fellini, I'm a Born Liar.
Yeah.
In the course of it, he tells, he reveals so much about the way he made films, but the scene you're talking about, they show you the filming of it. And Fellini, he's always got his hat on and he's always dressed with a big overcoat. And he's constantly adjusting his hat and adjusting his scarf, in the room. It's just like a tic he has. He's doing this all the time. But he has this sweet smile on his face and he's sitting just off camera. And there's the guy who's walking around the room playing the commandant. And he's doing something that Fellini did in many films. He has his actors recite numbers because he writes the script later. He uses post-dubbing. It was cheaper, and that's how they made films like that in Italy and most of Europe at the time. So his actors would be reciting numbers, and you can see him going, uno, due, tre, quattro. He's walking around saying numbers, but then as they're doing the scene again, Fellini's sitting there, and he's feeding lines to the guy with a smirk on his face, a snarky grin. That's why I want the group here to watch this movie, because it completely affirms what you're saying about the snarkiness. And he's smiling and he's putting words out there, and then the guy's reciting them. And he's saying, where were you last night? What about the tower and the record player making making fun of the Mussolini? And all of these things, Fellini is inventing on the spot, in the moment, with a smirk on his face. That's how his scripts were done. He had a contempt for the screenplay. He was really all about faces. He would say, faces, bring me faces. He would send his casting directors out into the streets of Rome, and they would come back with people. And for him, the faces told a story. And he would have like a sketch, an outline of what he wanted a character to be. Once he saw the face, then he eliminated from the character he was creating anything that didn't fit that face, and he added everything that he felt belonged with it. So he fleshed out his characters with the faces of the Italian people.
So Scott, what you're telling me is that I should teach my film students to not write the script first, but cast your film first, not knowing what it's really about, and
That's right.
then write the script according to the actors, the faces of the actors you get.
Well, for expressionism, that would be the formula. You know, I mean,
absolutely. And the other sort of great thing about making films that way is that for people that are just have anxiety about what those words will be, it gives you more time to worry about it. So
yeah,
you're putting off the inevitable.
This also brings in an important theme in discussing film, because narrative and representation, which is what film really is, and the question of realism versus expressionism versus formalism, Fellini was upset when they showed the film in Rimini, Amarcord. Mm-hmm. There were people shouting out in the audience, "There's me, that's me, Io, Io," you know, and they were recognizing themselves. Oh, this is, he made this after me. And he was upset by that. He didn't want there to be anything representational about it, because he wanted to get to a level of truth that was more universal. Yeah. So he felt that by creating characters that were based on sketches of people, but fleshing them out in a different way, that's what brought truth to his films. So he was actually upset if anyone could see representation from, yeah.
Yeah, but anybody who would come from that town would want to see themselves into something. So it's like a part of it is wish factor to identify that. And
well, you know, in that regard, it turns out there are two characters that were actual people from his past there.
Oh, really?
They were both women. Gradiska, you know, anything you want, whatever that means.
And the tobacconist.
No, not the tobacconist, actually. Volpina. Volpina. Oh, Volpina was the town nymphomaniac who at one point you see he's fixing his bicycle. That was an actual event in his life, where the town kind of sexy gal comes up and helps him blow up his bicycle tire when it was flat. And then she gave him his first French kiss, and he had his first little episode, and he was telling his friends about it. So Volpina is the one that goes up to the construction workers while they're building the house.
Yes.
You know, I've lost my cat somewhere, you know, where's my pussycat? And they're going, go home, go home. So those two characters turned out to be actual figures from his own past. And probably, what was the one from 8½? Sarangetta? What's her name? The one who played the big prostitute who danced for the boys.
Well, you know, Fellini has a kind of a Russ Meyer thing going on.
Yes, I think so.
You know, he loves the women with the big breast, and certainly one of the things that watching it last night, you know, in the 2020 frame, shall we say, the images of women could be somewhat problematic if viewed in the eyes of today.
Oh, yeah. Well, the tobacco shop scene, probably, yeah.
And just how we focus on what's her name in red all the time, and you're seeing Federico. You see shots of her ass a lot, and her legs, and she's just today we wouldn't shoot things like that. I mean,
no.
you would have those story elements there, but it just but you know they're clearly there.
Yeah. Well, and she talks about how he kept coaching her to swing her hips more when she walked. That all of those scenes were memories for him from his past.
Yeah.
And he, of course, their exaggerated memory exaggerates things. And as a director, he wanted to reproduce his memories, not the
Right.
actual, but she recounted that she knew where he grew up, and she knew where the character that her character was based on had lived, which was a very upper crust part of the town. And this person would walk across the bridge every day and swing her hips and go to the processiona is in Italy. If you go to any town or city right after dinner, the local inhabitants will take a walk through the piazza. And I think it's called I don't remember my Italian, but processione, a procession.
That's right.
But that's what people do. They parade themselves
And
around.
you have the parades and I mean the processions are very much of a thing in a Fellini film. The beginning of the film, I mean, after that first scene in the barbershop and all that sort of stuff, but the burning of the
witch,
the witch,
yeah,
that is such a beautiful. I mean, in a film that is based around multiple characters, you sort of needed a way to sort of introduce them and to get them all kind of in the same place. And it's just like one of those things. It's not all one shot, like say Orson Welles might have done, but it gives you an opportunity to see all these people coming and going and doing all, and then sort of get an essence of the family that we're going to be focusing on, and their characters, and all and the sort of sense of what that town is like. That there's a kind of ritual going on with this burning, and there are some wise ass kids who want to pull the ladder down. I mean, it's
right, and keep the kid at the top of the fire.
Right,
Yeah.
keep the kid at the top of the fire. I mean, so it's like there are so many little details that give you the sort of the feel of what that universe is about to lay out, and it's a really kind of a wonderful thing. And when you were talking a minute ago about like him like trying to figure out what's going on this and not writing the dialogue, so you got, when you're doing this as a studio picture, and Cinecittà, big studio, lots of people, it's like you have to get the things you want there. You have to get the people there, and the set pieces are always really important. And then for him, it's just like all that stuff is sort of easy, but the words are the things that he struggles with. But being in that moment gives him the words, like you saw in that piece. And I thought that was really kind of cool.
That's also the place he introduces the narrator, which was not really a fill-in for himself, as I first thought when I was watching the film, but because the fill-in for himself is Tita, the boy, but the narrator with the mustache, who they're photographing him. If you remember the scene, it's a, what do you call it, a pan where the camera's panning, and he's walking behind the people, and he's kind of looking over at the camera, but it's going through the full circle all the way around the entire town piazza. We get introduced to what's going on in this little town by the narrator, surrounding a celebration, a festivity. And one of the things I remember from just about all of his films is that he believed that celebrations, festivals, holidays were where life really comes to a head, where things really, it brings the whole community together. And where there's a celebration, there's life. So in his films, there are birthdays, there are funerals, there are weddings. There's the beginnings and the ends. Like in this film, framed by the the beginning scene with the peasant. I don't know if any of you, has anyone here seen the dubbed version, which it was made to fit your TV. It was in the old aspect ratio. It was a horrible color, but he dubbed it himself. He picked the actors. So guess what he picks for the peasant at the beginning? A Brooklyn dock worker. He gets someone with a Brooklyn accent, and they came in, and I can do it. The guy goes, "In the springtime, the flower puffs, they're in the air, floating endlessly." He was reading it off as some guy who's not a voice actor is reading this. He get me this guy from New York. They flew him over from Brooklyn, I'm sure. But he figured that's the equivalent of, made it more surreal for him. but the same guy is the one that's waving goodbye at the end of the film.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's nothing random about it. It's really a beautiful film coming full circle there.
So, and then there's the scene with the uncle in the tree, which, you know, that it just, there's, it's kind of a long setup. You got to pick him up, long drive
Uncle
out
Tito,
there.
was it? Yeah.
Yeah, Uncle Tito. He pees on himself. He's got rocks in his pocket. Why does he have rocks in his pocket? Well, we find out later. I mean, all this is a long buildup for, and you wonder as you're watching this, like, what is this scene about? Like, what, you know, what does this have to do with anything? And all of that is to have this incredible little sequence of up in a tree, which, and he expresses, you know, I think what all men like would probably say if they were up in a tree and had the guts to say,
I want a woman,
right?
the donut. And what is the woman that he gets? A dwarf nun.
A dwarf nun who don't take shit from nobody. You know, it's like all these people are trying to get him down, and it takes the dwarf nuns like, come on down. Oh, okay, I got it.
They get apples on the head. Everyone's getting hit with an apple. The father is on the other side of the building, jumping on his hat, pulling his hair out. And then this other guy's looking at the camera, pointing at the father, saying, look at this guy. What's he doing? Yeah, beautiful.
There are many of those moments, those self-reflecting, looking at the camera, talking to us, that work really, really well. Well, we can't go very much further without talking about the music.
Oh my gosh. You can't ever talk about a Fellini film made with Nino Rota without realizing that he made these films with Nino Rota on the set. And whenever he was stuck and had writer's block and didn't know what to do next, he would call Nino Rota over and ask him to play something on the accordion or the piano. Mm-hmm. And he would start playing something, and suddenly Fellini would have a breakthrough and know what he had to do next in the scene. The music of Nino Rota, and particularly Amarcord, is my favorite of all of his soundtracks.
Yeah, I was playing it before as we were coming in, you know, guys, and it just, the music has been in my head, and like I said, I haven't seen this since 1973, and all of those pieces of music I just absolutely remember. They're sort of ingrained in my heart, and one of the moments in the film is that the guy who plays the blind guy who plays the accordion, when he is playing that music, particularly at the wedding scene, it's just very, very beautiful. I mean, all of his scenes are great. Whenever you see the accordion player, it's a good scene.
Oh, it is. But the final scene, that's the part where the lump just grows in the throat, because you realize that Gradiska, who always wanted to marry a military guy,
right,
ends up with a bald-headed, pot-bellied policeman from a small suburb. That's the man she marries, and she leaves. You know, she throws her. There's only a few people there,
right,
and you're wondering where it's going. And the spring puffs are in the air, and they have the close-up of the old guy with the accordion, and he's just playing. He's leaning from side to side. I mean, and the color becomes, when they're in the restored version, the yellow and the green of the grass as he's playing, but the tone of it. And the beauty of that song. Da, 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 da,
and the little girl gets the bouquet and she's kind of running around with it. You know, it's a very, very beautiful, and it is, you know, so sad. You know, it's like the hot girl in the small town, like him. That's it.
Right. It was the reality wake up. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Although again, not realism, because he didn't. That was the other thing, is that he really tried to avoid not only the representing the real people, but he tried to avoid too much realism. One of my favorite scenes is the Rex. Now, it turns out that the Rex ocean liner was a ship that went from Genoa to New York and back, but at one point during the war, it was shipping arms, and they had it over in Trieste. It got bombed and it was sunk in the port, but he knew of it there. And so they created this big cardboard cutout kind of image. And he was worried that the art department had done too good a job because it looked too real.
Yeah.
And then when they had the smoke coming out of the smokestacks, well, what happened is that the wind was blowing the wrong way that day. And so it was blowing the smoke in the direction that the ship was going, instead of, looking. So they had to wait for the winds to change so they could film that scene. But he did not want anything that made it look too realistic. When they made the spray for the water where the ship was supposed to be going through the water,
Right.
he's asking the production designer, is this going to look too real? I don't want it to look too real. It must be pure fantasy. And they said, no, don't worry. So finally he had the idea to take plastic and put water on the plastic, but they had these long sheets of plastic between the boats, because this is all done on a set.
Mm-hmm.
And they had stagehands picking up and moving the plastic so that it would kind of ripple. And if you look closely, there's really no water in the scene. The boats are sitting between plastic that's with light on it, making it look like water. And then the town going out to greet the boat, the provincial town that will spend the whole night waiting in the dark just so that they can wave and say, we're here, we see you. Amazing.
That scene, it's like there are scenes that stick with you from when you back in the 70s. I distinctly remember that scene, them all getting in the boat, getting excited, going out to visit it, and then like all they're doing is waving at this boat that's going by, that nobody is going to notice them at all.
No.
But it's for that town, it's like a connection to the outside world.
Exactly.
Because they are so insular, to see people from New York just passing by.
Right. Or it's like teenagers going to see Britney Spears or whoever on stage. They feel important because they're up there on the side, waving them on.
Right.
Well, so you've got these constructed scenes like this that was a tremendous amount of work to make, the rec sequence or the school sequences, especially the sequence we should return to in the Grand Hotel. But before we do the Grand Hotel, there's one scene that is so simple, and it's one of these beautiful moments that I don't know how it was, whether they constructed it by making it happen or they just captured it. But it's when they're out throwing snowballs at Gradiska. And they're hitting her in the behind in her red outfit again with snowballs, and all of a sudden says, look, it's the Count's pheasant, pheasant.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you see caw. This bird is flying, and then you see it land, and all of its feathers are behind it, and it's snowing, and all of a sudden it spreads its feathers and turns dead center. It's not really a zoom lens, but he had to have the right lens in that camera at that moment, because the entire screen, this is where you have to see cinema on the screen and not on an iPhone or a television or a tablet. The entire screen is this breathtaking image of this pheasant. And then as it, peacock, not pheasant, whatever.
It's the NBC logo, right?
Exactly. And then it just fades, and you have that wind. I don't know if you recognize it's the same wind in La Strada. It's one of his devices. He connects scenes with wind, and even when you pop your DVD in, on the menu, you'll hear the sound of the wind going. And at the end of the film, after they say goodbye and you hear the last strains of the Amarcord theme, you hear the wind, and suddenly for the first time the word Amarcord, I remember. And then it fades.
All right, so Scott, with all of your deep thinking in many ways, what is the deep meaning of the guy in the motorcycle?
I was going to bring him up. I don't have anything for that. I don't think there's a deep meaning. I think it's one of those things that Fellini did for the hell of it. Because I was going to say that the scene with the burning of the witch is the first time that the guy in the motorcycle appears. And he just keeps on, yeah. I have no idea, except maybe he's a prankster. Maybe every town has their annoying person who revs up their motorcycle and tears through. That one I don't know.
Never stops. Everybody sort of knows who he is, but And then just similar to that, there's the car race, which really only serves the purpose of fantasy of, like, what happens when they win. But I thought that was just that a small town like that would have a car race coming through there, and that everybody would know, like, oh, that's so and so, and that's so and so,
Right.
which
Well, that was all, I think, for the sake of shooting the scene with Aldine,
right.
the beautiful brunette who turns out that's the third reference in Fellini's life. Gradisca, Volpina, and Aldina.
Yeah.
Aldina was the young girl when he was a grade school, like early adolescent, who he had a big crush on. And she really just gave it to him. She wouldn't have anything to do with him. She would just give him looks and dismiss him. So at the end, in that sequence, it's his
Yeah.
friend, the chubby
Right.
guy, goes
Yeah.
driving off with her
Absolutely.
in the sports car. Yeah.
So you just wonder, it's like those women who just, like, didn't give him the time of day when he was a little kid. When they get to be like 30 or 40, they say, man, I could have gone out with Fellini and I blew
That's
it.
exactly right.
I was
Well,
really I was really mean to him, and there was no real reason for that. Um, yeah,
that might help explain some of his aggression in films like 8½, where he's got the towel around him and he's
yeah.
got the bullwhip and he's cracking the whip and they're playing dun da dun 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 da dun. What's that? The Ride of the Valkyries.
Valkyries, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, perfect music for that. Where the girlfriends who he retires have to go up the stairs. No, no, why am I going upstairs? I am not ready. And he keeps the
Yes.
current ones downstairs. Yeah.
Yes, not ready to go upstairs. Then there's dancing. There's a bit of nice dancing here, and the one that I love particularly is that scene where all of the young kids are dancing by themselves, and it's so beautiful in so many ways. It's like about adolescence, about, like, wanting to be dancing with a girl but not sure how to do it, and doing it together in a group, and yet the music is so evocative and it's in front of that beautiful space. There's something really kind of just magical about that whole sequence.
Now, I remember the scene where the adults are dancing at the party and the boys are looking
Right.
through this
No,
one.
but that's not this. There's
That's not
one
this.
there where they're just kind of like dancing to the music, to Nina Rota's music, by themselves.
Oh yeah, the guy dressed up as a girl. I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah,
put like a flower in his mouth or wore it. Yeah, the guys were dancing with each other. Yeah.
yeah. And then speaking of that, just okay. So somebody answer for me for this. What is it that that he puts on his head? You let that hair piece,
Uncle is the uncle.
the uncle. What is that, and what could that possibly do to make your hair look better? I mean, I just you've seen that in a few mostly Italian films, where, like, guys are doing that. Sometimes they'll have their undershirts on, but what is that? Does anybody know?
No, but I remember that. That was pretty funny. Yeah. The vanity of this fascist, because it was the brother. It was the brother of the wife
Yes.
of the mother of Tita,
Yeah.
and so the father is pissed off because her good-for-nothing gold-bricking brother, who lives in their house and doesn't contribute anything but eats all the food, he's
Yeah.
sitting there at the table in his t-shirt, his undershirt, and
Yeah.
the hairnet
Yeah.
to look good for the ladies later.
And I mean, you kind of that's he has, what does he have to live for? He has no self-respect. He doesn't work, doesn't do anything. And I would imagine that's the kind of person that fascism would be appealing to,
Mhm.
which is unfortunate. So do any of you guys have some questions? I mean, there's so many things to talk about. Leslie, you have any thoughts?
Can you talk about Can you talk about the music?
We talked about the music a little bit.
Oh, I missed it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, no, it's worth coming back to, because I mean, I don't have much knowledge about the music, but I have tremendous appreciation for it. Though I will tell you that when I ordered from Italy the sheet music for Amarcord,
Really?
the actual theme song, I couldn't even. I mean, I'm not good on piano, but this had 5 sharps and the key signature, and then halfway through it modulates into something like 6 flats. I mean, it was the most bizarre keys that I've ever seen. You know, like it's not done in the key of C or G or D. You know, it's F sharp minor or you know, B flat, G flat or something. It was the strangest scoring keys that I've ever seen musically on something like music for a film. I mean, that was how creative this guy Nino Rota was.
So do you play piano or you just collect the music?
You know, I took a year or 2 of lessons on piano and played vibes in the high school dance band, and that's about it. But I can still, you know, play chopsticks and stuff.
Oh.
I have the sheet music, but I can pick something out slowly. Do you remember Carl Haas used to do "Hello Everyone," and he would play Beethoven's Symphonique, whatever it was, the Pathétique. A girlfriend ordered me the sheet music. It took me 2 years to learn it. I can't sight read, but it's fun. But Fellini's is the hardest to play.
Is there any documentary evidence of this band you played in?
There's documentary evidence of me singing the Martin Heidegger blues in Norway last summer in a bar with a band backup. You can Google my last name and Martin Heidegger blues on YouTube and you'll find it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
Anything else at the Grand Hotel?
Yeah, Jeffrey. Hey, good to see you there.
Good to see you.
The Grand Hotel. Yeah, that was it's one of the most beautiful sequences in the film and most mystical, you know, where it goes black and then all of a sudden down, 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 and you know, the light comes on and you're in a magic room, and all of a sudden all of these dancing, you know, again, this is what Bart's talking about. We couldn't do this today. It would be, oh my gosh, you know, the exploitation. But everyone was on board with these things when this film was made. And of course, the Italian culture is very different from ours. I mean, we are a fundamentally Puritan culture. My Italian friends, I go over every other year if I can to Italy and spend a month there. And they're always teasing me, you Puritans, you know. Yeah, we are terrible that way. We're very unable to accept our own sexuality, and we have to be very judgmental about it. And it's always one political social system of repression replaces the next in America. But in France and Italy, you don't have that mentality. And they're very open about the body, and they don't understand the puritanical attitudes that we have today, to this day. They think it's ridiculous.
Well, you still have the you know, the preacher asking everybody if they've touched themselves.
Oh my God!
Oh, yeah.
And he's smelling his fingers constantly.
Right.
He's smelling his fingers.
He's just it's so creepy all the way through, and then cut to the 4 kids in the garage,
In the car with the lights coming on and off.
Coming on and off.
Radiska,
Right.
Voltina.
Right. It's just like who they all
tobacconist.
fantasize with is just really, you know, kind of telling about their characters. I wonder if that was something that that really happened in his youth.
I don't doubt it. Because we know that about him. One of the things that where he finds truth is in his memory, and what he manages to do in his exaggerated way of reenacting those memories and bringing them to life with bright color and exaggerated gestures. And even the actress Noel, who played Gradiska, said that he put this big black furry thing around her because he wanted her to look even more buxom than she really was. That he had this thing about the full figure woman, and he often had the costume designer design costumes that would always accentuate those things. So he was very adolescent at heart, but he was making a film about his adolescence, so he gets a little bit of a pass there.
Yeah.
to recreate the adolescent experience in a town that likewise is in its adolescence. And part of adolescent psychology is seeing things in black and white, not seeing ambiguity, not being able to cope with ambiguity. Traditionally, in the 50s and 60s, growing up, if there was a diagnosis, homosexual panic, when I first did my training at the VA hospital, if someone thought that he had a dream, or he liked to eat quiche, or he liked something, ballet, oh, does that make me homosexual? So adolescents tend to be totalizing. A little bit of something makes you all of that. And that's what fascism was. It was a totalizing, totalistic, totalitarian society. And so I think that the two went really hand in hand for Fellini, and that he really felt it was the naive, totalizing, seeing things in black and white that led the little provincial towns in Italy toward fascism. It's why they were able to be swept up into it, because they would totalistically worship the person who presented themselves as the fascist leader. They saw these things, and
I totally agree with you, but it makes me sad to just hear those words.
Which words?
About totally the leader believing everything. I mean, in the sense that we were. So Scott, talk about like where at this point in Fellini's career, he has all these great films, and he's got this great power. He's got, he can pretty much do anything he wants at Cinecittà. What happens after these films? What is your sense of the sort of later Fellini work?
That's a good question, because for me, this being my favorite film of all time and my favorite Fellini film, after that he did Casanova, and he did the Ship Sails On, and he did the orchestra rehearsal, if I remember, and eventually Intervista, which was an interview with him, a kind of a comical thing. It kind of trailed off. I mean, here was a guy who cut his teeth in film, acting as a camera assistant for Rossellini, I think in filming Roma, Open City, where they were doing the Italian neo-realism. So that was his, that's where he gives himself permission to break from neo-realism. But the first break, when the first neo-realist stuff that he was doing, the one with Broderick Crawford in it, the rascal, or the stinker. I'm trying to think what the name of it was. He was a swindler, the swindler. But finally, when he does La Strada, let's go back a little bit. La Strada was a very magical film, and if it was realism, it was almost magical realism. It was not in that Spanish sense, but he was going for the first time to go beyond something that was just socially relevant, that was showing the Italian citizenry in a post-World War II society struggling with life, which is what The Bicycle Thief was about. You know, don't bring in Hollywood movies. You know that when the Americans liberated Italy, they not only liberated Italy and brought food and cigarettes, they brought films. They carried in canister of films, and they were bringing in Hollywood films that filled all of the theaters in Italy. And so Italians then grew up watching these films of Rita Hayworth and, glamour films and all this stuff. So that's when De Sica and Rossellini said, no, we need films that show post-World War II Italian society. They started making those. So Fellini breaks out of this and he makes La Strada, which has such a more universal appeal. And then after this, we have a little break, and he does Nights of Cabiria, about a prostitute played by his wife. Beautiful, beautiful film. One of the earlier ones to be restored about 25 years ago. And then we get La Dolce Vita, followed by Otto e Mezzo, 8.5. Yes. That was, now to see that film, when you see enough of Fellini films, you can go back and look at 8.5 and begin to understand the grammar of his films, where you learn what is fantasy and what is not. When are you seeing a fantasy image is usually no sound at all. It's like Claudia Cardinale running through the spa like an angel. And then the real thing, you've got music. So he went through this period And then he went dry for a while. What am I going to do after La Dolce Vita? So he does 8.5 about a director who's
Can't
got
figure out
writer's
what to
block.
do.
And then
Right.
we have, I'm trying to remember, The Clowns came in 1970. There was one more, Satyricon, in 1968, which the actress for Gradisca also played in Satyricon and La Dolce Vita. It was on the strength of La Dolce Vita that he had her do Amarcord and Satyricon. So then you got Satyricon 1968, The Clowns, which is interesting because it's a documentary.
Yeah.
But like Herzog doing a documentary, it's also a mythic feature
Expressive.
film.
Right.
And when Herzog makes a movie, he's also making a documentary in a way. He drags the steamship over the hill in Fitzcarraldo. And so Fellini in a similar way. You almost can't draw the line between a feature film and a documentary, but to see The Clowns is a really nice separate little small film he did. And that was around 1970. And then 72 is Roma and 73 is Amarcord.
Has The Clowns been restored? I haven't seen that in a long time.
I don't think it has been. I don't think so.
So why most people tend to like 8.5 more than say Amarcord? Amarcord? Why do you prefer this?
Well, first of all, this was more accessible. At the year when I saw this, there wasn't anything I didn't understand in terms of what was happening in the scene.
Yes.
I never had to question whether I was in a dream, a fantasy, or reality. I wasn't dealing with the internal struggles of an artist who's representing himself with an alter ego, Marcello Mastroianni, on the screen, and who's creating, I mean, the fact that that film begins in a dream, a long extended dream sequence. And yeah, anyway, I think that film has a bit of a snoot factor to it. You're talking about snarky earlier.
Yeah.
You know, I used to get annoyed when people would say, "Oh, you've got to see 8.5. You've got to see 8.5," as if they understood it. You know, as if I was thinking, I've seen this friggin' thing 2 or 3 times. I can't make heads or tails of it. It was only when I began studying more cinematic representations of inner worlds and began to focus on teaching myself how directors use film techniques of cinematography and filters even to separate reality from fantasy. Then I was able to go back. I've shown this film to my students. I did a course on cutting edge films of the 60s, and I started with Psycho, and the next film was 8.5. They hated me for it because they couldn't make heads nor tails of it. But when I showed 8.5, 8 weeks into a semester where I was teaching cinematic representations of inner worlds, and we had shown them a half a dozen movies like An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge and others that deal, you know, The Swimming Pool even, Swimming Pool by Ozon, where you have something happening that's not really there. And you gradually learn the way that directors take us into fantasy, even while making it look like it's really happening. And then the audience learns to discern between what's real and what isn't. I gave myself the challenge that I wanted to teach a course so that when I gave them the final exam and it was 8.5, they would be able to write a paper on it, and they did. So it's not something to start with.
If you just showed Amarcord before showing 8.5, I think that would sort of lead you into it a little better. I think you would have a better understanding. But you're right in terms of understanding which state you're in and how to interpret that. And you know, I think audiences today are probably have more of a problem with it. And you know, when 8.5, you know, was in its heyday of people watching, you know, there were people just watching movies in a different kind of way. You know, like you, I would go to some place where there was here in Dallas at the Granada Theater, there was a 7 o'clock and a 9 o'clock film, and they would show all these things. And I would say a third of the people in that room probably had some sort of altered substance before, during, or after. And particularly, you know, if you're doing some kind of mind altering drug, the 8.5 takes on a completely different relationship between reality. I mean, just think about the difference between what somebody on marijuana would think about 8.5 and somebody on LSD would think about 8.5, because
Well,
LSD,
the person on LSD wouldn't see the film. They'd go right through the film, through the screen to the other side. They would be in the universe somewhere. But yeah, well, the person on marijuana watching 8.5, at the end of it, when you say, "Wow, were you able to figure out the parts that were real versus fantasy?" And they're going to say, "You mean there was some real stuff in there?"
like, oh
The
wow,
whole
man,
thing would be fantasy. Yeah.
that was great. That was cool, man. That's what they were saying after that. But those were very different and heady years. Do we have any other questions from any of you folks? I I really, first of all, thank you for coming and spending an hour
Yeah.
with us. But more importantly, thank you for like pushing me to rewatch this film, because we need joy in our life, and I think this film just really sort of talks about what cinema can do when it's done so well, and it's just so luxurious and beautiful and inspiring, and it just, there's something that cinema does great, and this really sort of exemplifies what that is.
Yes.
So thank you
Amen.
for pushing us into that.
Thank you.